This lesson provides an overview of cellular respiration. Here are the objectives. The function of cellular respiration is to release the energy that is stored in food so it can be used by the cell. And the overall reaction that summarizes cellular respiration is that glucose is oxidized. I'm going to write that here as reacted with oxygen, and that yields carbon dioxide and water. Now, the left side of this equation here has higher chemical potential energy than the right side. I'm going to write that as PE for potential energy. Again, the right side has lower chemical potential energy, and as a result, this overall reaction is going to release energy. And that energy is going to be stored in a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, abbreviated as ATP. Now, this reaction never happens all in one step in cellular respiration, but this is the overall summary of the process. If we wanted to write that in terms of chemical formulas, glucose is C6H12O6. We're going to need 6 oxygens on this side and 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters on the other in order to make the chemical equation balance. And if I wanted to put in the ATP over here, I could add that. And on the left side, I would put in ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Di means 2, tri means 3, so this has 2 phosphates, this has 3 phosphates, and it's having another phosphate added onto it. And this P with a sub I means inorganic phosphate. We're adding an inorganic phosphate to ADP, making ATP. And I haven't put in the numbers for the ADP and ATP here, but it actually turns out that cellular respiration generates about 30-ish ATP from one glucose. So you could imagine a 30-ish on either side. It's not actually exact. Now, if you think of taking glucose and burning it in oxygen, just think of a marshmallow that you've got at the end of the stick that gets too close to a campfire perhaps, and it catches on fire. It releases a lot of energy all at once. That's actually the same chemical reaction without the energy being captured in ATP. So cellular respiration is actually a controlled combustion. It's like that same burning of a marshmallow, but instead of all the energy coming out all at once, we're doing it in many very small steps, each one a reaction catalyzed by an enzyme, so that that energy can be captured rather than it just being all released at once as heat. Now, the organelle where most of cellular respiration takes place is the mitochondrion. The mitochondrion is about 1 micrometer or 1/1,000,000th of a meter in size. In comparison, a eukaryotic cell is about 10 to 100 times larger than that. And the mitochondrion is a double-membraned organelle. It's got an outer mitochondrial membrane, an inner mitochondrial membrane, and then in between that is the intermembrane space. That's this space in here. And that space is going to be really important because it's going to be a storage spot for protons. Protons are going to be pumped into that space, and that's going to act as a store of potential energy, as we'll see when we go into this in more detail. And inside of that is the matrix. The matrix is this space in here, and that's like the cytoplasm of the mitochondrion. These folds that we see in the inner mitochondrial membrane are called cristae, and their role is to increase the surface area of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And that's important because the inner mitochondrial membrane is the site of the electron transport chain, which I'll write as ETC, that we will look at in a future lesson. And that's where most of the ATP is actually produced. So there are 3 main stages to cellular respiration, and 2 of the 3, the last 2 of the 3, take place in the mitochondrion. Let's look at those stages now. I'm going to be using the 3 shapes that we see here in this diagram to represent the 3 stages of cellular respiration. This vertically oriented rectangle represents glycolysis, which is the first stage, and glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. It actually doesn't occur in the mitochondrion. It's the most evolutionarily old stage of cellular respiration. And here, glucose, which is a 6-carbon molecule, is being split into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. So we're producing 2 pyruvate from glucose. And we're also getting out a little bit of ATP, just a little bit. Then we move into the mitochondrion. So imagine this dotted line being the boundary of the mitochondrion. the two pyruvate molecules move into the mitochondrion, and then they are oxidized in a reaction that produces a molecule called acetyl-CoA. And this step is sometimes called the link reaction. The link reaction is producing acetyl-CoA from pyruvate, and that happens in the mitochondrion. And more specifically, we're in the matrix of the mitochondrion, which is like the cytoplasm of the mitochondrion. So we've moved out of the cytoplasm of the cell into the matrix of the mitochondrion. Now, this step that follows, where acetyl-CoA, which has just been made from pyruvate, is further oxidized, is called the Krebs cycle. So the Krebs cycle takes place in the matrix of the mitochondrion, and what's happening here is that pyruvate is being oxidized. It's having electrons removed, and that's producing carbon dioxide and some more ATP as well. So this is where the carbon dioxide that we breathe out is coming from. It's coming from the Krebs cycle, and actually also from the link reaction, which is producing some carbon dioxide as well. And this is where the carbon dioxide that we breathe out comes from. Now, these two steps are also generating something that I haven't yet indicated, and that's that they are generating some high energy electron carriers, which are called NADH and FADH2. Both NADH and FADH2 are being made in the Krebs cycle, and NADH is being made in glycolysis as well. And they are then going to travel to the next step. The next step in cellular respiration is called the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain, as I mentioned just previously, is located on the inner mitochondrial membrane. And at this stage, the carbons from glucose are completely gone. They've been released in that carbon dioxide. All we have left at this stage is in fact these high energy electron carriers that have been produced in glycolysis in the Krebs cycle. But they then feed into the electron transport chain, and that produces lots of ATP. So most of the ATP that is released from cellular respiration is being produced at the electron transport chain. The ATP produced directly from the Krebs cycle and glycolysis is just a small portion of the overall ATP. This last step, the electron transport chain, is where the vast majority of the ATP is coming from. So that's an overview of cellular respiration and the three steps and where they're located. I think you'll find it's helpful to return to an overview periodically as we start to look at more details about cellular respiration, in order to keep the big picture in mind.